All right, guys. Welcome to your Protestant Reformation video lecture here. And this is an extremely important event in both European history and world history, of course. You're splitting the very powerful and ultra powerful Catholic Church. Once upon a time, it was a solid unit. It's going to get, once it breaks once, it's going to get splintered into a ton of different denominations. All right. But before the actual Reformation, which we give credit to Martin Luther, you have a couple of forerunners that kind of prime this thing, right? John Wycliffe, you can see his dates there, 1324 to 1384. He was interested in the authority of the clergy as far as how much holy authority do they actually have over the people. Well, in that time period, they have a tremendous amount. You don't talk to God directly in that time period. You talk to your priest, and your priest talks to God on your behalf, and then he'll get back to you and tell you what God says. That's going to be called into question during the Reformation. John Wycliffe believed that people should be able to interpret and read the Bible on their own. And remember that takes a little bit of power and authority away from the church. The church had been telling people how to think and what to think. He is actually claiming that a person could read the Bible and think for themselves. But he lived during the Western Schism, which was this crazy time period where you had multiple popes, and it was really just a bad deal. So that did lead to the questioning about papal means pope, papal authority. Another early reformer was Jan Hus, again, around the same time period as Wycliffe. He actually wanted bishops elected and not appointed by the Pope because he felt like popes were limited because they were men, and that sometimes they appointed bishops for personal reasons. In areas they've never been to. He felt like the local areas should be the ones electing their bishops. At the Council of Constance, he tries to make his case, make his point. Unfortunately for him, it would only end up getting him burned at the stake because the church didn't like to be questioned. Again, a couple of early ones. Now, this guy's a really big dog, Erasmus. He's a little bit later in the game. He's a contemporary of the Martin Luther, who's the main protagonist in the Reformation. And there's a famous quote that says Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched. And all that means is that Erasmus put down some ideas about reforming the church from within. And that was going to influence Martin Luther, who certainly read these ideas. He was a little bit younger than Erasmus was. Erasmus held to Catholic doctrines such as free will. Some Protestant reformers rejected free will in favor of the doctrine of predestination. What it basically means is that Erasmus is Catholic. He considers himself Catholic. Martin Luther will for a while, but during the Reformation, you're going to get Protestant churches who see themselves as outside Catholic authority. Predestination is essentially your fate was decided, at the beginning of time, well before you were ever born. Whereas Erasmus believes that, and the Catholics believe that you have free will, that you make your decisions, that you can be a good guy, you can be a bad guy, whatever. Now, the Reformation, at least in the form that happens with Martin Luther, wouldn't have been possible without the very important invention of the printing press. Again, it made, when Martin Luther writes his 95 Thesis and he nails it up to the castle door there, they take it and they print it and it recirculates and it spreads. It spreads his ideas very quickly and very cheaply. And again, people have access to books whenever they want them. So now they're starting to read political books where people are questioning the power of the church. People are done with the ultra authority of the church by this point. Now, what was the Protestant Reformation? Simply a religious split from the Catholic Church in the early 1500s and led to the establishment of a number of new churches. You'll get your Lutheran church, you'll get your Presbyterian church or some of the early ones, you'll get Anabaptist that are early, Methodist, and then, of course, you'll have 100 different Christian denominations. People grew displeased with the churches. They were tired of the church's financial corruption. all the money they were paying to the churches. Why was the Pope living in such luxury? Jesus never lived in such luxury. The abuses of power at the hands of the church, that the church could burn you at the stake. And the fact, again, that the church was being immoral, that popes were having children out of wedlock. They weren't even supposed to marry anyway, but they were getting women pregnant and all that good stuff. Now, Pope Leo X, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back here. Pope Leo X needed money to build St. Peter's Basilica, which is pictured there in front of you. It's a magnificent thing, but it's also very costly. So he sells something you have to know called indulgences. And what indulgences were pardons issued by the Pope that people could buy to reduce a soul's time in purgatory. What that means is, if you got a local lord who likes to party, he knows he's sinning, he doesn't want to go to hell. So when church comes around on Sunday and he goes in there and he talks to his priest, he tells the priest all the bad things he's doing. The priest says, you could buy an indulgence, because the Catholics believe you have to basically pay for your sins in an in-between realm called purgatory. And before you can go to heaven, or before you descend to hell, whatnot. But if you want to go to heaven, you got to do your time in purgatory before you get up there. But he tells this rich guy, listen, you give me a little bit of money to do the Lord's work and build St. Peter's Basilica, and we'll pass you an indulgence, and it will lessen your time in purgatory. Well, if you're a rich person, you've got the money, why not? You get to have your cake and eat it too. You can party and sin and then not have to pay for it in the afterlife. That's perfect. Martin Luther doesn't like this idea. He feels like it is against the church. It's against Jesus's ideals. And so he's so bothered that he sits up for a couple of nights and he writes down his grievances, called his 95 Thesis. Basically his 95 ways that the church could reform, change, or make itself better. Now, this happens in Germany. He's going to nail that up on the castle wall so everybody can see it, and it's going to get insane. And it's going to lead to millions of people's deaths. Now, there were language barriers in this time period. We've talked a little bit about it, but most uneducated people didn't understand Latin, which had been the common language during the Roman era, but they knew their local language or their vernacular. And again, almost all those Bibles were written in Latin before the Reformation, so they literally couldn't read the Bible. They were completely under power of their priest and their clergy members. So it's the job of the clergy to translate the Bible to lay people. Lay people means people who are not part of the church. Now, this is Martin Luther, the guy, the man, the myth, the legend. He's only one of many leaders of the Protestant Reformation, just like Martin Luther King Jr. was only one of the leaders of the civil rights movement in America. There were many others. He's really upset with how far the Catholic Church has fallen, and he feels like he's corrupt. Now, he nails his 95 Thesis on the door in 1517. They were written in Latin. Very important. He does not want to break the church. He loves the church. He doesn't want to see the church fall, but he feels like it needs reformed. And that's his intentions. So 3 of the main things that he criticizes is the practice of indulgences by pardoned merchants, such as Johann Tetzel. These merchants are these priests going around selling indulgences. He didn't like the power of the Pope. He felt that the Bible and God himself were the ultimate authorities, not the Pope. So this became a very direct attack at the Pope's authority. And he criticized the wealth of the church. The church was doing good things in communities, but not nearly as much as they should be doing with the amount of wealth that they possessed. Again, looking at Jesus' model, Jesus was never rich. Never rich. He felt that God's grace was won by faith alone. You had to be a believer, and if you were a believer, then you were saved. You could go to heaven. The Catholic view was you had to basically do X amount of good works to have a chance to go to heaven. And that's not how Martin Luther saw things. Well, within 3 years, Pope Leo X excommunicated Luther, which meant that he kicked him out of the church. Now, the idea behind that is that if you cannot take communion on the Sundays because you've been excommunicated, you can't go to heaven. But Martin Luther doesn't believe in the Pope's authority, and he believes that if he has faith in God, that he can go to heaven anyway. So this doesn't scare Martin Luther like it scared people in the past. You also had a secular king or an emperor get involved. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He passed measures to suppress Luther's writings because he was a devout Catholic. He didn't like this attack on the church, and so he allies with the church. But Germany is a hodgepodge of over 300 different little provinces and stuff, and many of those German princes, they were on the side of Martin Luther. So they issued these protests, and that's where the term Protestant comes from. They're protesting the practices of the Catholic Church. They're protesting the excommunication of Martin Luther. Martin Luther is protected by those princes. Now, there were other reformations in other areas, such as Ulrich Zwingli's in Switzerland. He builds a utopian area that was powered by the church. It was that theocracy. The state and the church are joined and are not separated. You had John Calvin create one in Switzerland, and he creates the idea of predestination, that God knows who will be saved even before people are born, and therefore guides the lives of those destined for salvation. You also had John Knox, who started the Presbyterian Church over in Scotland. Oh, almost done. The Reformation in England actually began with a king, King Henry VIII, the famous one. He had 6 wives, 2 of which he beheaded for various reasons. You're going to get to know that information a lot more. He did this because he wanted a son and he wasn't getting one. So he wanted a divorce, and the Pope refused to give him one. And so he's going to break away from the church. We're going to go into a lot more detail on King Henry VIII. And there is some pictures of his wives, paintings of his wives. The Reformation Parliament was a gathering that led to the decision that England was no longer under the authority of the Pope. King Henry VIII issued something very important called the Act of Supremacy. Subjects were required to take an oath that declared King Henry to be the absolute supreme head of the Church of England, that he was the man running the show and not the Pope. There were a lot of effects of Henry VIII. He has tremendous cause and effect here. He had legitimate children, meaning that these are children he had with his wife. He had plenty of what's known as bastard children with women who were not his wives. But his oldest was Mary, who becomes known as Bloody Mary later on. She was raised Catholic like her mother, Catherine of Aragon, of whom he was married to for about 20 years. When he dies, she brings back the Catholic Church in England and killed many Protestants. She had about 300 of them burned at the stake, hence the name Bloody Mary. Now, she will get replaced by Queen Elizabeth I, who was his daughter with Anne Boleyn. She was raised Protestant, unlike her half-sister, and ruled England for 44 years. She is one of the most powerful monarchs in world history, but especially European history. She never married another man because she didn't want to share power, but she had a lot of tremendous effects in her reign. But again, we'll go into more detail with that in class. Okay, that is it. Incredibly important that you take notes over this and that you're ready, because if you don't, the test is going to destroy you. So please take this seriously, and I'll see you in class.